Chapter 4. 3 Centuries of Occultism. It has been shown in the foregoing chapters that from very early times occult sects had existed for two purposes: esoteric and political. Whilst the Manichaeans, the early Ismailis, the Bogomils, and the Luciferians had concerned themselves mainly with religious or esoteric doctrines, the later Ismailis, the Fatimites, the Karmathites, and Templars had combined secrecy and occult rites with the political aim of domination. We shall find this double tradition running through all the secret society movement up to the present day. The dualist doctrines attributed to the Templars were not, however, confined to this order in Europe, but had been, as we have seen, those professed by the Bogomils and also by the Cathari, who spread westwards from Bulgaria and Bosnia to France. It was owing to their sojourn in Bulgaria that the Cathari gained the popular nickname of Bulgars or Boogers, signifying those addicted to unnatural vice. One section of the Cathari in the south of France became known after 1180 as the Albigenses, thus called from the town of Albi, although their headquarters were really in Toulouse. Christians only in name, they adhered in secret to the Gnostic and Manichaean doctrines of the earlier Cathari, which they would appear to have combined with Johannism, since, like this Eastern sect, they claimed to possess their own Gospel of St. John. Although not strictly a secret society, the Albigenses were divided after the secret society system into initiates and semi-initiates. The former, few in number, known as the perfecti, led in appearance an austere life, refraining from meat and professing abhorrence of oaths or of lying. The mystery in which they enveloped themselves won for them the adoring reverence of the credentes, who formed the great majority of the sect and gave themselves up to every vice, to usury, brigandage, and perjury, and whilst describing marriage as prostitution, condoning incest and all forms of license. The credentes, who were probably not fully initiated into the dualist doctrines of their superiors, looked to them for salvation through the laying on of hands according to the system of the Manichaeans. It was amongst the nobles of Languedoc that the Albigenses found their principal support. This Judah of France, as it has been called, was peopled by a medley of mixed races, Iberian, Gallic, Roman, and Semitic. The nobles, very different from the ignorant and pious chivalry of the north, had lost all respect for their traditions. There were few who in going back did not encounter some Saracen or Jewish grandmother in their genealogy. Moreover, many had brought back to Europe the laxity of morals they had contracted during the Crusades. The Comte de Comminges practiced polygamy, and, according to ecclesiastical chronicles, Raymond VI, Comte de Toulouse, one of the most ardent of the Albigense credentes, had his harem. The Albigensian movement has been falsely represented as a protest merely against the tyranny of the Church of Rome. In reality, it was a rising against the fundamental doctrines of Christianity more than this, against all principles of religion and morality. For whilst some of the sect openly declared that the Jewish law was preferable to that of the Christians, to others the God of the Old Testament was as abhorrent as the false Christ who suffered at Golgotha. The old hatred of the Gnostics and Manichaeans for the Demiurgus lived again in these rebels against the social order. Forerunners of the 17th century libertines and 18th century Illuminati, the Albigense nobles, under the pretext of fighting the priesthood, strove to throw off all the restraints the Church imposed. Inevitably the disorders that took place throughout the south of France led to reprisals, and the Albigenses were suppressed with all the cruelty of the age, a fact which has afforded historians the opportunity to exalt them as noble martyrs, victims of ecclesiastical despotism. But again, as in the case of the Templars, the fact that they were persecuted does not prove them innocent of the crimes laid to their charge. Satanism. At the beginning of the 14th century, another development of dualism, far more horrible than the Manichaean heresy of the Albigenses, began to make itself felt. This was the cult of Satanism, or black magic. The subject is one that must be approached with extreme caution, owing to the fact that on one hand much that has been written about it is the result of medieval superstition, which sees in every departure from the Roman Catholic faith the direct intervention of the evil one. Whilst on the other hand the conspiracy of history, which denies in toto the existence of the occult power, discredits all revelations on this question, from whatever source they emanate, as the outcome of hysterical imagination. This is rendered all the easier since the subject by its amazing extravagance lends itself to ridicule. It is, however, idle to deny that the cult of evil has always existed. The invocation of the powers of darkness was practiced in the earliest days of the human race and, after the Christian era, found its expression, as we have seen, in the Cainites, the Yukites, and the Luciferians. These are not surmises, but actual facts of history. Towards the end of the 12th century, Luciferianism spread eastwards through Styria, the Tyrol, and Bohemia, even as far as Brandenburg. By the beginning of the 13th century it had invaded western Germany, and in the 14th century reached its zenith in that country as also in Italy and France. The cult had now reached a further stage in its development, and it was not the mere propitiation of Satan as the prince of this world practiced by the Luciferians, but actual Satanism, the love of evil for the sake of evil, which formed the doctrine of the sect known in Italy as La Vecchia Religione, or the Old Religion. Sorcery was adopted as a profession, and witches, not, as is popularly supposed, sporadic growths, were trained in schools of magic to practice their art. These facts should be remembered when the Church is blamed for the violence it displayed against witchcraft. It was not individuals, but a system which it set out to destroy. The essence of Satanism is desecration. In the ceremonies for infernal evocation described by Eliphaz Levi we read, "It is requisite to profane the ceremonies of the religion one belongs to and to trample its holiest symbols underfoot." This practice found a climax in desecrating the Holy Sacrament. The consecrated wafer was given as food to mice, toads, and pigs, or defiled in unspeakable ways. A revolting description of the Black Mass may be found in Huysmans's book Law. It is unnecessary to transcribe the loathsome details here. Suffice it, then, to show that this cult had a very real existence, and if any further doubt remains on the matter, the life of Gilles de Rais supplies documentary evidence of the visible results of black magic in the Middle Ages. Gilles de Rais was born at Machecoul in Brittany about the year 1404. The first period of his life was glorious. The companion and guide of Jeanne d'Arc, he became Marechal of France and distinguished himself by many deeds of valor. But after dissipating his immense fortune, largely on church ceremonies carried out with the wildest extravagance, he was led to study alchemy, partly by curiosity, and partly as a means for restoring his shattered fortunes. Hearing that Germany and Italy were the countries where alchemy flourished, he enlisted Italians in his service, and was gradually drawn into the further region of magic. According to Huysmans, Gilles de Rais had remained until this moment a Christian mystic under the influence of Jeanne d'Arc, but after her death, possibly in despair, he offered himself to the powers of darkness. Evokers of Satan now flocked to him from every side, amongst them Prelati, an Italian, by no means the old and wrinkled sorcerer of tradition, but a young and attractive man of charming manners. For it was from Italy that came the most skillful adepts in the art of alchemy, astrology, magic, and infernal evocation, who spread themselves over Europe, particularly France. Under the influence of these initiators, Gilles de Rais signed a letter to the devil in a meadow near Machecoul asking him for knowledge, power, and riches, and offering in exchange anything that might be asked of him with the exception of his life or his soul. But in spite of this appeal, and of a pact signed with the blood of the writer, no satanic apparitions were forthcoming. It was then that, becoming still more desperate, Gillis de Rice had recourse to the abominations for which his name has remained infamous, still more frightful invocations, loathsome debaucheries, perverted vice in every form, sadistic cruelties, horrible sacrifices, and, finally, holocausts of little boys and girls collected by his agents in the surrounding country, and put to death with the most inhuman tortures. During the years 1432 to 40, literally hundreds of children disappeared. Many of the names of the unhappy little victims were preserved in the records of the period. Gillis de Rice met with a well-deserved end. In 1440 he was hanged and burnt. So far he does not appear to have found a panegyrist to place him in the ranks of noble martyrs. It will, of course, be urged that the crimes here described were those of a criminal lunatic, and not to be attributed to any occult cause. The answer to this is that Gillis was not an isolated unit, but one of a group of occultists who cannot all have been mad. Moreover, it was only after his invocation of the Evil One that he developed these monstrous proclivities. So also his 18th-century replica, the Marquis de Sade, combined with his abominations and impassioned hatred of the Christian religion. What is the explanation of this craze for magic in Western Europe? Deschamps points to the Kabbalah, that science of demoniacal arts, of which the Jews were the initiators, and undoubtedly in any comprehensive review of the question the influence of the Jewish Kabbalists cannot be ignored. In Spain, Portugal, Provence, and Italy the Jews by the 15th century had become a power. As early as 1450 they had penetrated into the intellectual circles of Florence, and it was also in Italy that, a century later, the modern Kabbalistic school was inaugurated by Isaac Luria, 1533–72, whose doctrines were organized into a practical system by the Hasidim of Eastern Europe for the writing of amulets, the conjuration of devils, mystical jugglery with numbers and letters, etc. 9. Italy in the 15th century was thus a center from which Kabbalistic influences radiated, and it may be that the Italians who indoctrinated Gilles de Rice had drawn their inspiration from this source. Indeed, Eliphas Levi, who certainly cannot be accused of anti-Semitism, declares that the Jews, the most faithful trustees of the secrets of the Kabbalah, were almost always the great masters of magic in the Middle Ages, and suggests that Gilles de Rice took his monstrous recipes for using the blood of murdered children from some of those old Hebrew grimoires, books on magic, which, if they had been known, would have sufficed to hold up the Jews to the execration of the whole earth. Voltaire, in his Henriade, likewise attributes the magical blood rites practiced in the 16th century to Jewish inspiration. Dans l'ombre de la nuit, sous un vote obscur, le silence conduit leur assemblée impure. A la pale lueur d'un magique flambeau s'élève un vil autel dresse sur un tombeau. C'est là que de deux rois en plaque les images, objets de leur terreur, objets de leurs outrages. Leurs sacriléges mains ont mêlés sur l'autel et de noms infernaux le nom de l'Éternel. Sur ces murs ténébreuses de lances sont ranges, dans de vases de sang leurs points sont plonges, appareil ménicat de leur mystère affreux. Le portrait de ces temples est un de ces hébraïques, proscrits sur la terre et citoyens du monde, portant de murs en murs leur misère profonde, et, dans antique ramas de superstitions, ont rempli de longs temps toutes les nations, etc. Voltaire adds in a footnote, it was ordinarily Jews that were made use of for magical operations. This ancient superstition comes from the secrets of the Kabbalah, off which the Jews called themselves the sole depositaries. Catherine de' Medicis, the Marichal d'Ancre, and many others employed Jews for these spells. This charge of black magic recurs all through the history of Europe from the earliest times. The Jews are accused of poisoning wells, of practicing ritual murder, of using stolen church property for purposes of desecration, etc. No doubt there enters into all this a great amount of exaggeration, inspired by popular prejudice and medieval superstition. Yet, whilst condemning the persecution to which the Jews were subjected on this account, it must be admitted that they laid themselves open to suspicion by their real addiction to magical arts. If ignorant superstition is found on the side of the persecutors, still more amazing superstition is found on the side of the persecuted. Demonology in Europe was in fact essentially a Jewish science, for although a belief in the spirits existed from the earliest times, and has always continued to exist amongst primitive races, and also amongst the ignorant classes in civilized countries, it was mainly through the Jews that these dark superstitions were imported to the West, where they persisted not merely amongst the lower strata of the Jewish population, but formed an essential part of Jewish tradition. Thus the Talmud says, if the eye could perceive the demons that people the universe, existence would be impossible. The demons are more numerous than we are, they surround us on all sides like trenches dug round vineyards. Every one of us has 1,000 on his left hand and 10,000 on his right. The discomfort endured by those who attend rabbinical conferences comes from the demons mingling with men in these circumstances. Besides, the fatigue one feels in one's knees in walking comes from the demons that one knocks up against at every step. If the clothing of the rabbis wears out so quickly, it is again because the demons rub up against them. Whoever wants to convince himself of their presence has only to surround his bed with sifted cinders, and the next morning he will see the imprints of cocks' feet. The same treatise goes on to give directions for seeing demon by burning portions of a black cat, and placing the ashes in one's eye, then at once one perceives the demons. The Talmud also explains that devils particularly inhabit the water spouts on houses, and are fond of drinking out of water jugs. Therefore it is advisable to pour a little water out of a jug before drinking, so as to get rid of the unclean part. These ideas received a fresh impetus from the publication of the Zohar, which, a Jewish writer tells us, from the 14th century held almost unbroken sway over the minds of the majority of the Jews. In it the Talmudic legends concerning the existence and activity of the Shevhim, demons, are repeated and amplified, and a hierarchy of demons was established corresponding to the heavenly hierarchy. Manasseh, ben Israel, Nishmat Hayim is full of information concerning belief in demons. Even the scholarly and learned rabbis of the 17th century clung to the belief. Here, then, it is not a case of ignorant peasants evolving fantastic visions from their own scared imaginations, but of the rabbis, the acknowledged leaders of a race claiming civilized traditions and a high order of intelligence, deliberately inculcating in their disciples the perpetual fear of demoniacal influences. How much of this fear communicated itself to the Gentile population? It is at any rate a curious coincidence to notice the resemblances between so-called popular superstitions and the writings of the rabbis. For example, the vile confessions made both by Scotch and French peasant women accused of witchcraft concerning the nocturnal visits paid them by male devils find an exact counterpart in passages of the Kabbalah, where it is said that the demons are both male and female. And they also endeavor to consort with human beings, a conception from which arises the belief in incubi and succubo. Thus, on Jewish authority, we learn the Judaic origin of this strange delusion. It is clearly to the same source that we may trace the magical formula for the healing of diseases current at the same period. From the earliest times the Jews had specialized in medicine, and many royal personages insisted on employing Jewish doctors, some of whom may have acquired medical knowledge of a high order. The Jewish writer Margoliouth dwells on this fact with some complacency, and goes on to contrast the scientific methods of the Hebrew doctors with the quackeries of the monks, in spite of the reports circulated by the monks that the Jews were sorcerers. In consequence of their superior medical skill, Christian patients would frequent the houses of the Jewish physicians in preference to the monasteries, where cures were pretended to have been effected by some extraordinary relics, such as the nails of St. Augustine, the extremity of St. Peter's second toe, etc. It need hardly be added that the cures effected by the Jewish physicians were more numerous than those by the monkish impostors. Yet in reality the grotesque remedies, which Margoliouth attributes to Christian superstition, appear to have been part derived from Jewish sources. The author of a further article on magic in Hastings' Encyclopedia goes on to say that the magical formula handed down in Latin in ancient medical writings, and used by the monks, were mainly of Eastern origin, derived from Babylonish, Egyptian, and Jewish magic. The monks therefore played merely an intermediate role. Indeed, if we turn to the Talmud we shall find cures recommended no less absurd than those which Margoliouth derides. For example, the eggs of a grasshopper as a remedy for toothache, the tooth of a fox remedy for sleep, viz. the tooth of a live fox to prevent sleep, and of a dead one to cause sleep, the nail from the gallows where a man was hanged, as a remedy for swelling. A strongly pro-Semite writer quotes a number of Jewish medical writings of the 18th century, republished as late as the end of the 19th, which show the persistence of these magical formulae amongst the Jews. Most of these are too loathsome to transcribe, but some of the more innocuous are as follows: for epilepsy kill a cock and let it putrefy. In order to protect yourself from all evils, gird yourself with the rope with which a criminal has been hung. Blood of different kinds also plays an important part. Fox's blood and wolf's blood are good for stone in the bladder, ram's blood for colic, weasel blood for scrofula, etc. These to be externally applied. But to return to Satanism. Whoever were the secret inspirers of magical and diabolical practices during the 14th to the 18th centuries, the evidence of the existence of Satanism during this long period is overwhelming and rests on the actual facts of history. Details quite as extravagant and revolting as those contained in the works of Eliphaz Levi or in Huysmans's Law are given in documentary form by Margaret Alice Murray in her singularly passionless work relating principally to the witches of Scotland. The cult of evil is a reality by whatever means we may seek to explain it. Eliphaz Levi, whilst denying the existence of Satan as a superior personality and power, admits this fundamental truth: evil exists, it is impossible to doubt it. We can do good or evil. There are beings who knowingly and voluntarily do evil. 24. There are also beings who love evil. Levi has admirably described the spirit that animates such beings in his definition of black magic. Black magic is really but a combination of sacrileges and murders graduated with a view to the permanent perversion of the human will and the realization in a living man of the monstrous phantom of the fiend. It is, therefore, properly speaking, the religion of the devil, the worship of darkness, the hatred of goodness exaggerated to the point of paroxysm. It is the incarnation of death and the permanent creation of hell. The Middle Ages, which depicted the devil fleeing from holy water, were not perhaps quite so benighted as our superior modern culture has led us to suppose. For that hatred of goodness exaggerated to the point of paroxysm, that impulse to desecrate and defile which forms the basis of black magic, and has manifested itself in successive phases of the world revolution, springs from fear. So by their very hatred the powers of darkness proclaim the existence of the powers of light, and their own impotence. In the cry of the demoniac, "What have we to do with thee, Jesus of Nazareth? Art thou come to destroy us? I know thee who thou art, the Holy One of God." Do we not hear the unwilling tribute of the vanquished to the victor in the mighty conflict between good and evil? The Rosicrucians. In dealing with the question of magic, it is necessary to realize that although to the world in general the word is synonymous with necromancy, it does not bear this significance in the language of occultism, particularly the occultism of the 16th and 17th centuries. Magic at this date was a term employed to cover many branches of investigation which Robert Flood, the English Rosicrucian, classified under various headings, of which the first three are as follows. 1. Natural magic. That most occult and secret department of physics, by which the mystical properties of natural substances are extracted. 2. Mathematical magic, which enables adepts in the art to construct marvelous machines by means of their geometrical knowledge, whilst 3. Benefic magic is familiar with potions, philters, and with various preparations of poisons. It is obvious that all these have now passed into the realms of science, and are no longer regarded as magical arts, but the further categories enumerated by Flood and comprised under the general heading of necromantic magic retain the popular sense of the term. These are described as 1. Goetic, which consists in diabolical commerce with unclean spirits, in rites of criminal curiosity, in illicit songs and invocations, and in the evocation of the souls of the dead. 2. Maleficent, which is the adjuration of the devils by the virtue of divine names, and 3. Theurgic, purporting to be governed by good angels and the divine will, but its wonders are most frequently performed by evil spirits, who assume the names of God and of the angels. 4. The last species of magic is the thaumaturgic, begetting illusory phenomena. By this art the Magi produced their phantoms and other marvels. To this list might be added celestial magic, or knowledge dealing with the influence of the heavenly bodies, on which astrology is based. The forms of magic dealt with in the preceding part of this chapter belong therefore to the second half of these categories, that is to say, to necromantic magic. But at the same period another movement was gradually taking shape, which concerned itself with the first category enumerated above, that is to say the secret properties of natural substances. A man whose methods appear to have approached to the modern conception of scientific research was Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, commonly known as Paracelsus, the son of a German doctor, born about 1493, who during his travels in the East is said to have acquired a knowledge of some secret doctrine, which he afterwards elaborated into a system for the healing of diseases. Although his ideas were thus doubtless drawn from some of the same sources as those from which the Jewish Kabbalah descended, Paracelsus does not appear to have been a Kabbalist, but a scientist of no mean order, and, as an isolated thinker, apparently connected with no secret association, does not enter further into the scope of this work. Paracelsus must therefore not be identified with the school of so-called Christian Kabbalists, who from Raymond Lully, the Doctor Illuminatus of the 13th century, onward, drew their inspiration from the Kabbalah of the Jews. This is not to say that the influence under which they fell was wholly pernicious, for, just as certain Jews appear to have acquired some real medical skill, so also they appear to have possessed some real knowledge of natural science, inherited perhaps from the ancient traditions of the East or derived from the writings of Hippocrates, Galen, and other of the great Greek physicians, and as yet unknown to Europe. Thus Eliphaz Levi relates that the Rabbi Jechiel, a Kabbalistic Jew protected by St. Louis, possessed the secret of ever-burning lamps, claimed later by the Rosicrucians, which suggests the possibility that some kind of luminous gas or electric light may have been known to the Jews. In alchemy they were the acknowledged leaders. The most noted alchemist of the 14th century, Nicholas Flamel, discovered the secret of the art from the Book of Abraham the Jew, prince, priest, Levite, astrologer, and philosopher. And this actual book is said to have passed later into the possession of Cardinal Richelieu. It was likewise from a Florentine Jew, Alemanus or Daedalus, that Pico della Mirandola, the 15th century mystic, received instructions in the Kabbalah and imagined that he had discovered in it the doctrines of Christianity. This delighted Pope Sixtus IV, who thereupon ordered Kabbalistic writings to be translated into Latin for the use of divinity students. At the same time the Kabbalah was introduced into Germany by Reuchlin, who had learnt Hebrew from the Rabbi Jacob B. Jechiel Loans, court physician to Frederick III, and in 1494 published a Kabbalistic treatise De Verbo Mirifico, showing that all wisdom and true philosophy are derived from the Hebrews. Considerable alarm appears, however, to have been created by the spread of rabbinical literature, and in 1509 a Jew converted to Christianity, named Pfefferkorn, persuaded the Emperor Maximilian I to burn all Jewish books except the Old Testament. Reuchlin, consulted on this matter, advised only the destruction of the Toldat Yeshu and of the Sefer Nizikon by the Rabbi Lippmann, because these works were full of blasphemies against Christ and against the Christian religion, but urged the preservation of the rest. In this defense of Jewish literature, he was supported by the Duke of Bavaria, who appointed him professor at Ingolstadt, but was strongly condemned by the Dominicans of Cologne. In reply to their attacks, Reuchlin launched his Defense de Arte Kabbalistica, glorifying the Kabbalah, of which the central doctrine for him was the Messianology around which all its other doctrines grouped themselves. His whole philosophical system, as he himself admitted, was in fact entirely Kabbalistic, and his views were shared by his contemporary Cornelius Agrippa of Nettesheim. As a result of these teachings, a craze for Kabbalism spread amongst Christian prelates, statesmen, and warriors, and a number of Christian thinkers took up the doctrines of the Kabbalah and essayed to work them over in their own way. Athanasius Kircher and Knorr, Baron von Rosenroth, author of the Kabbalah Denudata, in the course of the 17th century endeavored to spread the Kabbalah among the Christians by translating Kabbalistic works which they regarded as most ancient wisdom. Most of them, the Jewish Encyclopedia goes on to observe derisively, held the absurd idea that the Kabbalah contained proofs of the truth of Christianity. Much that appears Christian in the Kabbalah is, in fact, nothing but the logical development of certain ancient esoteric doctrines. The Rosicrucians appear to have been the outcome both of this Kabbalistic movement and of the teachings of Paracelsus. The earliest intimation of their existence was given in a series of pamphlets which appeared at the beginning of the 17th century. The first of these, entitled the Fama Fraternitatis, or a discovery of the fraternity of the most laudable order of the Rosy Cross, was published at Kassel in 1614, and the Confessio Fraternitatis early in the following year. These contain what may be described as the grand legend of Rosicrucianism, which has been repeated with slight variation up to the present day. Briefly, this story is as follows. The most godly and highly illuminated father, our brother Cr., that is to say, Christian Rosenkreuz, a German, the chief and original of our fraternity, was born in 1378, and some 16 years later traveled to the east with a brother Pal, who had determined to go to the Holy Land. On reaching Cyprus, Brother Pal died, and so never came to Jerusalem. Brother Cr., however, having become acquainted with certain wise men of Damascus in Arabia, and beheld what great wonders they wrought, went on alone to Damascus. Here the wise men received him, and he then set himself to study physic and mathematics, and to translate the book M into Latin. After 3 years he went to Egypt, whence he journeyed on to Fez, where he did get acquaintance with those who are called the elementary inhabitants, who revealed to him many of their secrets. Of those of Fez he often did confess that their magia was not altogether pure, and also that their Kabbalah was defiled with their religion. But notwithstanding he knew how to make good use of the same. After 2 years Brother Cr departed the city Fez, and sailed away with many costly things into Spain, where he conferred with the learned men, and being ready bountifully to impart all his arts and secrets, showed them amongst other things how there might be a society in Europe which might have gold, silver, and precious stones sufficient for them to bestow on kings for their necessary uses and lawful purposes. Christian Rosicrucians then returned to Germany, where there is nowadays no want of learned men, magicians, Kabbalists, physicians, and philosophers. Here he builded himself a fitting and neat habitation in the which he ruminated his voyage and philosophy, and reduced them together in a true memorial. At the end of 5 years' meditation there came again into his mind the wished for reformation. Accordingly, he chose some few adjoined with him, the brethren G.V., I.A., and I.O., the last of whom was very expert and well learned in Kabbalah, as his book H witnesseth, to form a circle of initiates. After this manner began the fraternity of the Rosy Cross. 5 other brethren were afterwards added, all Germans except I.A., and these 8 constituted his new building called Sancti Spiritus. The following agreement was then drawn up. First, that none of them should profess any other thing than to cure the sick, and that gratis. Second, none of the posterity should be constrained to wear one certain kind of habit, but therein to follow the custom of the country. Third, that every year, upon the day C, they should meet together at the house Sancti Spiritus, or write the cause of his absence. Fourth, every brother should look about for a worthy person who after his decease might succeed him. Fifth, the word CR should be their seal, mark, and character. Sixth, the fraternity should remain secret 100 years. Finally Brother CR died, but where and when, or in what country he was buried, remained a secret. The date, however, is generally given as 1484. In 1604 the brethren, who then constituted the inner circle of the order, discovered a door on which was written in large letters Post 120 Annos Petibo. On opening the door a vault was disclosed to view, where beneath a brass tablet the body of Christian Rosicrucian was found, whole and unconsumed, with all his ornaments and attires, and holding in his hand the parchment which next unto the Bible is our greatest treasure. Whilst beside him lay a number of books, amongst others the Vocabulario of Paracelsus, who, however, the Fama observes, earlier was one of our fraternity. The brethren now knew that after a time there would be a general reformation both of divine and human things. While declaring their belief in the Christian faith, the Fama goes on to explain that our philosophy is not a new invention, but as Adam after his fall hath received it, and as Moses and Solomon used it. Wherein Plato, Aristotle, Pythagoras, and others did hit the mark, and wherein Enoch, Abraham, Moses, Solomon, did excel, but especially wherewith that wonderful book the Bible agreeth. It will be seen that, according to this manifesto, Rosicrucianism was a combination of the ancient secret tradition handed down from the patriarchs through the philosophers of Greece, and of the first Kabbalah of the Jews. The grand legend of Rosicrucianism rests, however, on no historical evidence. There is, in fact, not the least reason to suppose that any such person as Christian Rosicrucian ever existed. The Illuminatus von Nigg in the 18th century asserted that it is now recognized amongst enlightened men that no real Rosicrucians have existed, but that the whole of what is contained in the Fama and the Universal Reformation of the World, another Rosicrucian pamphlet, which appeared in the same year, was only subtle allegory of Valentine Andrea, of which afterwards partly deceivers, such as the Jesuits, and partly visionaries made use in order to realize this dream. What, then, was the origin of the name Rose-Cross? According to one Rosicrucian tradition, the word rose does not derive from the flower depicted on the Rosicrucian cross, but from the Latin word ros, signifying dew, which was supposed to be the most powerful solvent of gold, whilst crux, the cross, was the chemical hieroglyphic for light. It is said that the Rosicrucians interpreted the initials of the cross INRI by the sentence igni nitrum roris invenator, supposing this derivation to be correct. It would be interesting to know whether any connection could be traced between the first appearance of the word Rosy Cross in the Fama Fraternitatis at the date of 1614, and the Kabbalistic treatise of the celebrated Rabbi of Prague, Shabbatai Sheftel Horowitz, entitled Shifa Tal, that is to say, The Effusion of Dew, which appeared in 1612. 37. Although this book has often been reprinted, no copy is to be found in the British Museum, so I am unable to pursue this line of inquiry further. A simpler explanation may be that the Rosy Cross derived from the Red Cross of the Templars. Mirabeau, who as a Freemason and an Illuminatus was in a position to discover many facts about the secret societies of Germany during his stay in the country, definitely asserts that the Rose-Croix Masons of the 17th century were only the ancient order of the Templars secretly perpetuated. L'École de Canteleu is more explicit. In France the Knights Templar, who left the order, henceforth hidden and so to speak unknown, formed the Order of the Flaming Star and of the Rose-Croix, which in the 15th century spread itself in Bohemia and Silesia. Every grand officer of these orders had all his life to wear the Red Cross, and to repeat every day the prayer of St. Bernard. Eckert states that the ritual, symbols, and names of the Rose-Croix were borrowed from the Templars, and that the order was divided into 7 degrees, according to the 7 days of creation, at the same time signifying that their principal aim was that of the mysterious, the investigation of being and of the forces of nature. The Rosicrucian Kenneth Mackenzie, in his Masonic Cyclopedia, appears to suggest the same possibility of Templar origin. Under the heading of Rosicrucians, he refers enigmatically to an invisible fraternity that has existed from very ancient times, as early as the days of the Crusades, bound by solemn obligations of impenetrable secrecy, and joining together in work for humanity and to glorify the good. At various periods of history this body has emerged into a sort of temporary light, but its true name has never transpired, and is only known to the innermost adepts and rulers of the society. The Rosicrucians of the 16th century finally disappeared and re-entered this invisible fraternity from which they had presumably emerged. Whether any such body really existed, or whether the above account is simply an attempt at mystification devised to excite curiosity, the incredulous may question. The writer here observes that it would be indiscreet to say more. But elsewhere he throws out a hint that may have some bearing on the matter, for in his article on the Templars he says that after the suppression of the order it was revived in a more secret form and subsists to the present day. This would exactly accord with Mirabeau's statement that the Rosicrucian were only the order of the Templars secretly perpetuated. Moreover, as we shall see later, according to a legend preserved by the Royal Order of Scotland, the degree of the Rosy Cross had been instituted by that order in conjunction with the Templars in 1314. And it would certainly be a remarkable coincidence that a man bearing the name of Rosicrucian should happen to have inaugurated a society, founded, like the Templars, on Eastern secret doctrines during the course of the same century, without any connection existing between the two. I would suggest, then, that Christian Rosicrucian was a purely mythical personage, and that the whole legend concerning his travels was invented to disguise the real sources whence the Rosicrucians derived their system, which would appear to have been a compound of ancient esoteric doctrines of Arabian and Syrian magic, and of Jewish Kabbalism, partly inherited from the Templars, but reinforced by direct contact with Kabbalistic Jews in Germany. The Rosicrucians, says Mirabeau, were a mystical, Kabbalistic, theological, and magical sect, and Rosicrucianism thus became in the 17th century the generic title by which everything of the nature of Kabbalism, theosophy, alchemy, astrology, and mysticism was designated. For this reason it has been said that they cannot be regarded as the descendants of the Templars. Mr. Waite, in referring to the alleged connection between the Templars and the Brethren of the Rosy Cross, observes, "The Templars were not alchemists, they had no scientific pretensions, and their secret, so far as it can be ascertained, was a religious secret of an anti-Christian kind." The Rosicrucians, on the other hand, were preeminently a learned society, and they were also a Christian sect. The fact that the Templars do not appear to have practiced alchemy is beside the point. It is not pretended that the Rosicrucians followed the Templars in every particular, but that they were the inheritors of a secret tradition passed on to them by the earlier order. Moreover, that they were a learned society, or even a society at all, is not at all certain, for they would appear to have possessed no organization like the Templars or the Freemasons, but to have consisted rather of isolated occultists bound together by some tie of secret knowledge concerning natural phenomena. This secrecy was no doubt necessary at a period when scientific research was able to be regarded as sorcery, but whether the Rosicrucians really accomplished anything is extremely doubtful. They are said to have been alchemists, but did they ever succeed in transmuting metals? They are described as learned, yet do the pamphlets emanating from the fraternity betray any proof of superior knowledge? The Chemical Marriage of Christian Rosicrucians, which appeared in 1616, certainly appears to be the purest nonsense magical imaginings, the most puerile kind, and Mr. Waite himself observes that the publication of the Fama and the Confessio Fraternitatis will not add new luster to the Rosicrucian reputations we are accustomed to regard the adepts of the Rosy Cross as beings of sublime elevation and preternatural physical powers, masters of nature, monarchs of the intellectual world. But here in their own acknowledged manifestos they avow themselves a mere theosophical offshoot of the Lutheran heresy, acknowledging the spiritual supremacy of a temporal prince and calling the Pope Antichrist. We find them intemperate in their language, rabid in their religious prejudices, and instead of towering giant-like above the intellectual average of their age, we see them buffeted by the same passions and identified with all opinions of the men by whom they were environed. The voice which addresses us behind the mystical mask of the Rosicrucians does not come from an intellectual throne. So much for the Rosicrucians as a learned society. What, then, of their claim to be a Christian body? The Rosicrucian student of the Kabbalah, Julius Sperber, in his Echo of the Divinely Illuminated Fraternity of the Admirable Order of the R.C., 1615, has indicated the place assigned to Christ by the Rosicrucians. In De Quincey's words, having maintained the probability of the Rosicrucian pretension on the ground that such Magnalia Dei had from the creation downwards been confided to the keeping of a few individuals, agreeably to which he affirms that Adam was the first Rosicrucian of the Old Testament, and Simeon the last, he goes on to ask whether the gospel put an end to the secret tradition. By no means, he answers. Christ established a new college of magic among his disciples, and the greater mysteries were revealed to St. John and St. Paul. John Yarka, quoting this passage, adds, "This, Brother Findel points out, was a claim of the Carpocratian Gnostics. It was also, as we have seen, a part of the Johannite tradition, which is said to have been imparted to the Templars. We shall find the same idea of Christ as an initiate running all through the secret societies up to the present day. These doctrines not unnaturally brought on the Rosicrucians the suspicion of being an anti-Christian body. The writ of a contemporary pamphlet published in 1624 declares that this fraternity is a stratagem of the Jews and Kabbalistic Hebrews, in whose philosophy, says Pic de la Mirandole, all things are as if hidden in the majesty of truth, or as in very sacred mysteries. Another work, Examination of the Unknown and Novel Kabbalah of the Brethren of the Rose Cross, agrees with the assertion that the chief of this execrable college is Satan, that its first rule is denial of God, blasphemy against the most simple and undivided Trinity, trampling on the mysteries of the redemption, spitting in the face of the Mother of God and of all the saints. The sect is further accused of compact with the devil, sacrifices of children, of cherishing toads, making poisonous powders, dancing with fiends, etc. Now, although all this would appear to be quite incompatible with the character of the Rosicrucians as far as it is known, we have already seen that the practices here described were by no means imaginary. In this same 17th century, when the fame of the Rosicrucians was first noised abroad, black magic was still, as in the days of Gilles de Rais, a horrible reality not only in France, but in England, Scotland, and Germany, where sorcerers of both sexes were continually put to death. However much we may deplore the methods employed against these people, or question the supernatural origin of their cult, it would be idle to deny that the cult itself existed. Moreover, towards the end of the century it assumed in France a very tangible form in the series of mysterious dramas known as the Affaire de Poisons, of which the first act took place in 1666. When the celebrated Marquise de Brinvilliers embarked on her amazing career of crime in collaboration with her lover Saint Croix. This extraordinary woman, who for 10 years made a hobby of trying the effects of various slow poisons on her nearest relations, thereby causing the death of her father and brothers, might appear to have been merely an isolated criminal of the abnormal type, but for the sequel to her exploits in the epidemic of poisoning which followed, and during 20 years kept Paris in a state of terror. The investigation of the police finally led to the discovery of a whole band of magicians and alchemists, a vast ramification of malefactors covering all France, who specialized in the art of poisoning without fear of detection. Concerning all these sorcerers, alchemists, compounders of magical powders and philters, frightful rumors circulated, pacts with the devil were talked of, sacrifices of newborn babies, incantations, sacrilegious masses and other practices as disquieting as they were lugubrious. Even the king's mistress, Madame de Montespan, is said to have had recourse to black masses in order to retain the royal favor through the agency of the celebrated sorceress Lavoisin, with whom she was later implicated in an accusation of having attempted the life of the king. All the extraordinary details of these events have recently been described in the book of Madame Latour, where the intimate connection between the poisoners and the magicians is shown. In the opinion of contemporaries, these were not isolated individuals, their methods were too certain, their execution of crime too skillful and too easy for them not to have belonged, either directly or indirectly, to a whole organization of criminals who prepared the way and studied the method of giving to crime the appearance of illness, of forming, in a word, a school. The author of the work here quoted draws an interesting parallel between this organization and the modern traffic in cocaine, and goes on to describe the 3 degrees into which it was divided. firstly, the heads, cultivated and intelligent men, who understood chemistry, physics, and nearly all useful sciences, invisible counselors, but supreme, without whom the sorcerers would have been powerless. Secondly, the visible magicians employing mysterious processes, complicated rites and terrifying ceremonies. And thirdly, the crowd of nobles and plebeians who flocked to the doors of the sorcerers and filled their pockets in return for magic potions, philters, and, in certain cases, insidious poisons. Thus La Voisin must be placed in the second category. In spite of her luxury, her profits, and her fame, she is only a subaltern agent in this vast organization of criminals. She depends entirely for her great enterprises on the intellectual chiefs of the corporation. Who were these intellectual chiefs? The man who first initiated Madame de Brinvilliers' lover Saint Croix into the art of poisoning was an Italian named Exili, or Egidi, but the real initiate from whom Egidi and another Italian poisoner had learnt their secrets is said to have been Glaser, variously described as a German or a Swiss chemist, who followed the principles of Paracelsus and occupied the post of physician to the king and the Duc d'Orleans. This man, about whose history little is known, might thus have been a kind of Rosicrucian. For since, as has been said, the intellectual chiefs from whom the poisoners derived their inspiration were men versed in chemistry, in science, in physics, and the treatment of diseases, and since, further, they included alchemists and people professing to be in possession of the philosopher's stone, their resemblance with the Rosicrucians is at once apparent. Indeed, in turning back to the branches of magic enumerated by the Rosicrucian Robert Flood, we find not only natural magic, that most occult and secret department of physics by which the mystical properties of natural substances are extracted, but also venefic magic, which is familiar with potions, philters, and with various preparations of poisons. The art of poisoning was therefore known to the Rosicrucians and, although there is no reason to suppose it was ever practiced by the heads of the fraternity, it is possible that the inspirers of the poisoners may have been perverted Rosicrucians, that is to say, students of those portions of the Kabbalah relating to magic both of the necromantic and venefic varieties, who turned the scientific knowledge, which the fraternity of the Rosy Cross used for healing, to a precisely opposite and deadly purpose. This would explain the fact that contemporaries like the author of the Examination of the Unknown and novel Kabbalah of the Brethren of the Rose Cross should identify these brethren with the magicians and believe them to be guilty of practices deriving from the same sources as Rosicrucian knowledge, the Kabbalah of the Jews. Their modern admirers would, of course, declare that they were the poles asunder, the difference being between white and black magic. Huysmans, however, scoffs at this distinction, and says the use of the term white magic was a ruse of the Rosicrucians. But of the real doctrines of the Rosicrucians no one can speak with certainty. The whole story of the fraternity is wrapped in mystery. Mystery was avowedly the essence of their system. Their identity, their aims, their doctrines, are said to have been kept a profound secret from the world. Indeed, it is said that no real Rosicrucian ever allowed himself to be known as such. As a result of this systematic method of concealment, skeptics on the one hand have declared the Rosicrucians to have been charlatans and impostors, or have denied their very existence, whilst on the other hand romancers have exalted them as depositaries of supernatural wisdom. The question is further obscured by the fact that most accounts of the fraternity, as, for example, those of Eliphas Levi, Hargrave Jennings, Kenneth Mackenzie, Mr. A. Waite, Dr. Wynne Westcott, and Mr. Cadbury Jones, are the work of men claiming, or believing themselves to be initiated into Rosicrucianism, or other occult systems of a kindred nature, and as such in possession of peculiar and exclusive knowledge. This pretension may at once be dismissed as an absurdity. Nothing is easier than for anyone to make a compound out of Jewish Kabbalism and Eastern Theosophy, and to label it Rosicrucianism. But no proof whatever exists of any affiliation between the self-styled Rosicrucians of today and the 17th century Brothers of the Rosy Cross. In spite of Mr. Waite's claim, the real history of the Rosicrucians still remains to be written, at any rate in the English language. The book he has published under this name is merely a superficial study of the question, largely composed of reprints of Rosicrucian pamphlets accessible to any student. Mr. Wigston and Mrs. Pott merely echo Mr. Waite. Thus everything that has been published hitherto consists in the repetition of Rosicrucian legends, or in unsubstantiated theorizings on their doctrines. What we need are facts. We want to know who were the early Rosicrucians, when the fraternity originated, and what were its real aims. These researches must be made, not by an occultist weaving his own theories into the subject, but by a historian free from any prejudices for or against the order. Capable of weighing evidence and of bringing a judicial mind to bear on the material to be found in the libraries of the continent, notably the Bibliothèque de l'Arsenal in Paris. Such a work would be a valuable contribution to the history of secret societies in our country. But if the continental brethren of the Rose-Croix form but a shadowy group of invisibles, whose identity yet remains a mystery, the English adepts of the order stand forth in the light of day as philosophers well known to their age and country. That Francis Bacon was initiated into Rosicrucianism is now recognized by Freemasons, but a more definite link with the Rosicrucians of the continent was Robert Flood, who after traveling for 6 years in France, Germany, Italy, and Spain, where he formed connections with Jewish Kabbalists, was visited by the German Jew Rosicrucian Michel Meyer-Doctor to the Emperor Rudolph, by whom he appears to have been initiated into further mysteries. In 1616 Flood published his Tractatus Apologeticus, defending the Rosicrucians against the charges of detestable magic and diabolical superstition brought against them by Libatius. 12 years later Flood was attacked by Father Mersenne, to whom a reply was made by Flood, or a friend of Flood's, containing a further defense of the order. The book, says Mr. Waite, treats of the noble art of magic, the foundation and nature of the Kabbalah, the essence of veritable alchemy, and of the Causa Fraterum Rosicrucis. It identifies the palace or home of the Rosicrucians with the scriptural house of wisdom. In further works by English writers, the Eastern origin of the fraternity is insisted on. Thus Thomas Vaughan, known as Eugenius Philalethes, writing in praise of the Rosicrucians in 1652, says that their knowledge at first was not purchased by their own disquisitions, for they received it from the Arabians, amongst whom it remained as the monument and legacy of the children of the East. Nor is this at all improbable, for the Eastern countries have been always famous for magical and secret societies. Another apologist of the Rosicrucians, John Hayden, who traveled in Egypt, Persia, and Arabia, is described by a contemporary as having been in many strange places among the Rosicrucians, and at their castles, holy houses, temples, sepulchres, sacrifices. Hayden himself, whilst declaring that he is not a Rosicrucian, says that he knows members of the fraternity and its secrets, that they are sons of Moses, and that this Rosicrucian physique or medicine, I happily and unexpectedly alight upon in Arabia. These references to castles, temples, sacrifices, encountered in Egypt, Persia, and Arabia inevitably recall memories of both Templars and Ismailis. Is there no connection between the invisible mountains of the Brethren referred to elsewhere by Hayden, and the mountains of the Assassins and the Freemasons? Between the scriptural house of wisdom and the Dar al-Hikmat, or Grand Lodge of Cairo, the model for Western Masonic lodges. It is as the precursors of the crisis that arose in 1717 that the English Rosicrucians of the 17th century are of supreme importance. No longer need we concern ourselves with shadowy brethren laying dubious claim to supernatural wisdom, but with a concrete association of professed initiates proclaiming their existence to the world under the name of Freemasonry.